Hi, Cat's Cradle here. Time for another Friday question and answers. I can't believe how quickly the weeks go by. I'm sure it's probably like that for you too. I just can't believe we're here again for another Friday session. Most of the questions, as usual, have to do with food storage and long-term food storage and food preservation, so let's just get right in. Midnight Rose 58 said that she recently bought a dehydrator and saw that you need to spray lemon juice on some of the fruits. She said she'd look for a sprayer and that they're hard to find. Was it okay to get one from the hardware department to use? She said she didn't know if that would make a difference or if the plastic wasn't meant for food products. My recommendation, of course, is always to find, if you can, in the food department a sprayer, but I have used the little sprayers that I can find in the cosmetics section. I wash them out good with soap and water and spritz a whole bottle of water out the nozzle, and then I have used those before. I'm not too much of a sprayer on my fruits that go on the dehydrator. I'd rather just slice them up into a bowl of acidulated water where I've either put a little bit of vinegar or a little bit of lemon juice or a little bit of ascorbic acid flakes. That's really my preference, just to dip them in that. If it's bananas, I like to dip those in either orange juice or pineapple juice and then put them on the dehydrator. So I don't spray very much. If you ever watch Dehydrate to Store, she's kind of like the queen of dehydrating, and she spritzes hers all the time, and I'm sure she does it, one, because it's effective, and two, because it's quick. But I just don't like cleaning out one of those sprayers all the time. I'd rather just dip my food in the water, the acid, and then just put it right on the dehydrator. So that's my answer for that. I am awake 1959 had a question about shredded carrots, the ones that come pre-shredded from the grocery store. She asked if she has to do anything to those. Does she have to blanch them or spray them, or can she just put them right on the dehydrating tray? Carrots are one of those vegetables that you can just put right on the dehydrating tray. Her other question was that she had an old Excalibur. In fact, her Excalibur is 32 years old. That's quite a recommendation, folks. And she wanted to know, she didn't have any of the fruit roll liners. Did she need to do something to keep those from falling through? Well, those little shreds definitely are going to shrink up and fall through your mesh, I feel certain. So my suggestion to her, and I have done this in the past before I had the mesh liners for my tray, I would just tear off a piece of plastic wrap and lay it on my tray and then just cut a little hole where the center part was and then just spread my food out on that, and it works just fine. The way most food dehydrators are designed is the air is going to circulate up the sides and then down through the center section, and all you're doing, if you cover it with plastic, you're just forcing it to come up the sides and then go back down the sides too, instead of going down the center of the tray. But it does work. I've done it very successfully. The other thing I recommend while we're talking about dehydrating is that if your little guide on your dehydrator says, your cheapo dehydrators, not the Excaliburs, because they get the right temperatures, but like Snack Master and the Nesco dehydrators, those, when it says dehydrate your fruit and vegetables at 135, I really recommend dehydrating at 125, and that's true on most of those temperature settings. I'd rather go slower and colder than hotter and faster. The food just seems to dehydrate better if you don't rush it, and then you don't run the risk of what we call hardening, meaning that the temperature is a little bit too high, and it makes a casing form around the outside of the food you're trying to dry while the inside still stays moist. The problem you get with that is once you seal it or put it in your jar or bag or whatever you're going to do with it, you run the risk of it growing mold. And if you vacuum seal it, there's less chance of that, but the minute you open it, that food will begin to grow mold at that point. So you don't want to have that happen. So in order to keep hardening from happening, dry at a little bit of a lower temp. It only costs about 7 cents an hour to run a dehydrator, so you're not talking about a lot of money. It's not sucking a lot of electricity. DDMM12407 says, I try to buy in bulk, but I don't always have time to do everything at once. I was wondering if you knew about canning meat after it's been frozen. I didn't know if the quality or canning process would be any different. Well, I have canned frozen meat lots of times. In my days when I was poorer than I am now, and chicken breast, they'd run chicken breast on for $1.39 or $1.49. Well, I could only buy one extra packet a week. I didn't have money to buy a lot and just go home and can. So I would just store them in the freezer and stock them up, and then when I got a stash, then I would can them. So that's a really good way to do it. There's no problem with canning frozen meat. In fact, if you're talking about game animals, it's actually preferable. No problem. So while we're talking about canning up frozen food, let me go ahead and remind you that Ball Cur has a coupon on right now for 75 cents off any case of their canning jars. That coupon is good till August 31st. They look like this. If you need canning jars, I suggest you go ahead and buy them now. You can go on eBay, and the coupon clippers will have these for sale. Technically, they're not selling coupons, they say. They're selling their service, which is clipping them and mailing them to you. But I ordered, I think I've already talked about this in video, I think I ordered 15 of those coupons. I only paid $2 for them. And so every time I go into a store that has a sale on Ball Cur jars, I just use one of my coupons for extra savings. But I recommend, especially, if there were a long-term power outage, or, heaven forbid we lost, power for, a year or something. One, you're going to have to either eat your food, two, you're going to have to can it, or three, it's going to spoil and you're going to have to bury it or something. So I recommend, especially for whatever you think you can't eat, you're going to eat as much as you can out of your freezer for the first 3 days. That's just smart. And then whatever's left, you need to try to can up if it's possible. So I recommend that you have a good stash of canning jars, and that's what I intend to do, is can up my freezer if the power's ever out for an extended period of time. Okay, Crabby Old Broad says, that's her name for herself, not mine. Do you find, okay, well, this got mixed in the food section. I'm going to go ahead and answer it. Do you find the soap, the liquid soap like we're making, the homemade soap, leaves a scum in your washer? I have some powdered, she made some powdered soap last year, not the liquid kind like I showed how to make, but it's the same idea. You grate the soap and you mix the washing soda and the borax, and then just make a dry washing powder, which is not the way I would do it. I don't like to do that because it does take a good while for that soap to dissolve. I really recommend you make the liquid soap like I showed how to do. But anyway, she had a soap buildup on the inside of her washing machine, and that sometimes happens if you have soft water. You can get that soap scum off by taking a rag that's been soaked in distilled white vinegar and wiping down the inside of your machine. Make that rag pretty soggy, and then go back in 15 or 20 minutes and wipe it again, and just keep doing that till it comes off. That vinegar will dissolve that soap scum, and you don't have to do anything else. You can just put your load of clothes in there after that, because the vinegar will not hurt your clothes. It actually will boost your laundry detergent's power. Okay. Crabby Old Broad also says, I think this question is from her, she says, do you pressure can your tomatoes or water bath them? She's heard both ways. Well, that's a good question. I do water bath my tomatoes. The other thing I will advise you to do, the old timers didn't do this, but today so many of our tomatoes have been bred to be low acid. They just don't have quite that bite when you bite them, and it's really hard for you to tell just by eating your tomatoes if they are the low acid or high acid. It can be very deceptive. So it's recommended that you add lemon juice to your tomatoes to be sure you've got that acid level up there, and then it's safe to water bath can them. Now the question comes in, if you're going to make a salsa and you're adding lots of peppers and onions and garlic and that kind of thing, do you significantly lower the pH to where it's unsafe to water bath can your tomatoes? And that's a question that's debated a lot. My recommendation is that you follow the Ball Blue Book of Canning when it comes to canning salsa, or another reputable source. Certainly universities are qualified, those state-funded universities who have food research labs. They can certainly provide you with recipes as well. But as long as you keep the percentage of low-acid foods like peppers, onions, and garlic, as long as you keep that ratio to tomatoes about where they say it should be, then you're going to be fine. I canned some salsa this week, and the recipe I used actually calls for some vinegar to go into that salsa to be sure that pH level is up, because it calls for so many onions, peppers, and garlic. If you're doing something off on your own and you're making, you're doing your own kind of recipe kind of thing, I would advise you to pressure can it, because you don't monkey around with those ingredient amounts and not get into some kind of shady area there, especially if you're canning tomato meat sauce or tomato and meatballs. Of course, that requires a pressure canner. So please consult a reputable source like the Ball Blue Book of Canning before you start putting up salsas and that kind of thing. Lady B0003 had some questions. Well, I'm not sure she had a question. She just said that she was going to try preserving some eggs by dehydrating them. Let me just tell you that I have been unsuccessful in doing that. I have tried it several different ways, and I have a background in commercial food service. Not that I've actually worked in that area, but I've had several college classes on that. So I think I'm sort of qualified to speak on this subject. Preserving or dehydrating eggs is a very tricky thing. The way they do it, when you buy these powdered eggs from Honeyville Grain or Augustin Farms or any other company that's selling them, Thrive and Survive, when you're buying powdered eggs from them, they have taken that raw egg liquid and shot it out of an extruder, a very fine mesh extruder, into a incredibly hot rotating drum. And when that fine mist hits that rotating drum, it falls off in the form of a powder, and it just keeps spraying that egg and drying it and falling off, and then you end up with this fine powder. Well, that's wonderful. They've got it very fine, and you can reconstitute that with water, and you can make a scrambled egg that pretty much tastes like a scrambled egg. Well, I have done everything I can to duplicate that, and my dehydrated eggs, no matter what I do, are disgusting. They smell like dried shrimp, and all I know to do with them, I know they're safe, or I feel certain they're safe, so all I know to do is to mix them in the dog food, but I certainly won't eat them. There are several other options. Lady B bought a lot of eggs on sale. You can freeze eggs raw. My recommendation is that you take one of the old-timey plastic ice trays and spritz them with a release agent like Pam, and that you separate your eggs, and then you put a yolk in every one of the cups, and then in your another tray, of course, all of your whites will be together in a measuring cup, and you just fill the trays with the white. Then when you're ready for an egg, when those are frozen, then you pop them out and put them in a Ziploc bag. And I have a bag that's marked whites and a bag that's marked yolks. And when I want an egg, I get a yolk out of the yolk bag and a white out of the white bag, and I've got an egg. It's really best to separate them if you can. The other thing you can do, and this works just great, is you can boil your eggs, peel them, be sure they're absolutely cool, and then you can put those in Ziploc bags, and you can store frozen hard-boiled eggs. Now that's a handy thing to have in your freezer. If you're going to use them one day, like for tuna salad or chicken salad or whatever you use it for, just take it out the night before, leave it in the refrigerator, and it'll be ready to use the next day. And they're perfectly delicious, and you can not tell that they've been frozen. Shell, S-H-E-L-L-Z-B, Shellsby 910 says that she would like to buy some of that bulk cheese sauce in a number 10 can like you can buy at Costco or Sam, you know, like the nacho sauce kind of cheese. And she wanted to know what I thought about recanning that, pouring that up in canning jars and canning it. And I told her that I wouldn't do that. Because of the viscosity of that product, I would be concerned at exactly what the length of time would be needed in processing that to kill any bacteria that might be in it. It might have gotten in it in handling. I store a lot of the dehydrated cheese powder. I really like that. She was concerned because she wanted it to make mac and cheese in a, you know, a bad situation when she needed to make quick food. I would really recommend the cheese powder. I would not recan that liquid cheese. There's a couple of things that you really shouldn't try to can at home. I do refer you to Bear Prepper's series on cheese. She did show how to can some cheese, and you can decide whether the outcome of that is something that you like and would be palatable to you. It was interesting how she melted the cheddar cheese and how she did that, but you know what? She's an old pro, and if you're a novice to canning, you might hold off on something like that. Seems like there was one more thing I was going to tell you about cheese. If it comes to my mind, I'll tell you. Okay, Midnight Rose 58 says, I was wondering if you know how long Splenda can be stored. Her husband's a diabetic, and she uses it in lots of things, and she's never seen anybody talk about it. Well, Midnight Rose, there's not a lot of data on how long Splenda stores. A couple of years to be sure, based on the reports of people who've stored it and talked about it. They don't notice any taste difference in that length of time. Now, for those who don't know, Splenda is sucralose. It's a non-food that was originally produced in a laboratory. It's non-hygroscopic, which means it doesn't attract moisture. So that's good if you're talking about long-term storage. And pure sucralose undergoes some decomposition at elevated high temperatures, so it's probably best to store it in the coolest place you can in your home, which is generally true of all foods to be stored long term. My other recommendation to her was to consider growing stevia. Now, I have grown stevia in the past. I don't have any right now, but there's plenty of videos out there that can tell you how to use it. Just Google it on YouTube, using stevia, making stevia syrup, preserving stevia, and there's plenty of information out there on there, so I'm probably not going to make a video on that. Carol Ann 183 says, what do you do to keep the water safe to drink in the soda pop bottles, like the video I posted this week? Well, it's really simple. I do prefer to use soda pop bottles that have had sugar-free drinks in them, because I know there's not going to be any sugar on the walls of those bottles on the inside, because you can't actually really get a brush down in there and clean them out. So what I do is I put a couple of drops of dish detergent in there, fill them up with hot water, about 2/3 of the way full, shake them like crazy, rinse them out, and then fill them up with my tap water. Now my city water is chlorinated, and that is enough chlorine to keep any bacteria from growing in that jar, in that bottle. So I don't need to add any Clorox. You did see this week, if you watch my video, that we do try to recycle that water and use it to water plants and that kind of thing, and then refill the bottle and label it with the date that we refilled it. We've never had any problem using that water. I would go out there and drink it today. It's been stored for a couple of years, even though it may taste a little flat. You can certainly bring it back to life by pouring yourself a glass and then pouring it from glass to glass, and you put the oxygen back in it, and it makes it more palatable. But there's nothing I need to do with that water. Now, if you're talking about well water, One, I hope you've had your well water tested in the last 2 years. You probably should do that periodically. Your local health department can give you bottles to test to put your water in to test it. The charge for that is nominal. But if I were bottling well water to save like that, I certainly would add a little bleach to it. One question that not only I have been getting, but several other canners have been getting is, can you, in the same batch, when you're canning, can you, in the same batch, use different size jars? That's a little bit of a tricky question. You can do that. However, you must process that batch at the amount of time that the longest, the food in that jar has to be processed the longest. So if you're doing pints or quarts, and quarts have to be processed longer, of course, you have to do it according to the quart, which means your pint jars may be overcooked. If we're talking about pressure canning, I really wouldn't do that, although you can, because in my opinion, almost everything that is done in the pressure cooker is overdone, in my opinion. So if you're talking about canning boneless, skinless chicken breast, and you're going to have a mixed batch of pints and quarts, in my opinion, the pints are going to be really overcooked. Now, you may not care. I mean, if you're going to shred it and put it in a stew, or, I mean, you may not care. And when you start canning enough, that's not going to be an issue, because it'll be easy for you to have a whole canner full of quarts, or for you to have a whole canner full of pints. So I really advise against that if you can keep from it, but you certainly can. You just have to be very cautious and cook it as long as the longest jar needs to be cooked. Nag Empress wanted to know about what kind of things I would put in a first aid kit. I bought this little pencil holder in the school supply section that I showed in a video this week. It's filled with cosmetics that go in my purse, but I will be making a first aid kit out of it. I had hoped to have that ready today, but I don't. I will do that for next Friday's question. I'd like to finish up with just a couple of items of interest. These aren't really questions from anyone. Last week I was watching Nuggets of Truth, the guy from Ireland who's doing some investigative work. He posted a video that gave a link to a site called flightradar24.com. I thought it'd be interesting, so I went to look at that. What I saw was jaw-dropping. This is a site that mainly tracks flights over Europe. And I was stunned by what I saw, the amount of flights in the air at one time. This is a radar site that shows the planes in real time. I panned over to the U.S. and it tracks a few flights into New York, a few into Dallas-Fort Worth, a few into Los Angeles, but mostly it's tracking flights over Europe. But that's okay. I'm really actually kind of glad it didn't show how many flights at a given time are flying over my house. Take a look at that site and ponder what it might mean to you. You know, we all talk about EMP, and, you know, you've heard that term. And while I think the likelihood of an EMP caused by an attack from a foreign country is probably fairly remote, I am concerned about an EMP that might be caused by a CME, which is a coronal mass ejection. And if you're not following what's going on with the sun, let me direct you to spaceweather.com, a website that I check every morning, just kind of see what's going on. But NASA and others who watch the heavens are saying that the sun is going through an active phase. And it's not outside the realm of possibilities for an EMP to be caused by a coronal mass ejection. Even as remote as that may be, I think there might still be a possibility. If that were the case and that were to happen, Well, just think of what that would mean as you look at flightradar24.com, and you can draw your own conclusions. The sun actually has had a couple of ejections in the past few months that if those spots were facing the Earth, could have caused us some real trouble. We've just been fortunate that that hasn't happened. So check that out. The last thing I want to direct you to is the situation with drought throughout the country. My recommendation to you as I watch the news and as I read these stories is that if you are able and have the finances available, my recommendation would be that you purchase meat if your family are meat eaters. I would purchase beef, I would purchase chicken, and I would put as much of that in my freezer or can as much of that as I possibly can. Right now, farmers or ranchers are selling off because they can't feed their livestock. This is a story that appeared on CBS Evening News, and you can watch the video yourself. This story follows a 70-year-old rancher who's selling off all of his cattle because, as he said, the once fertile grasslands that fed his cattle are gone. There's been wildfire, there's been drought, and they just can't feed their cattle, so they're unloading them. So for right now, you can still find good prices on beef, and that's going to be true while the market is glutted. But once that ceases to be, and once those cattle and chicken and pigs and all that are sold off, I think you should look for the price to skyrocket. Here's another story that appeared on Yahoo News. The title is Texas Cattle Ranchers Feel Burn of Record Drought. There is a serious issue here. There's also not only a problem with the livestock, but this article says Texas producers have ginned or treated between 4.5 and 8 million bales of cotton in the past 8 years. So it's fluctuated between 4.5 and 8 million bales per year. This year, they're forecast to get just 2.5 million bales. If you need new sheets, if you need socks and underwear and those kind of things that are primarily made from cotton, now would be a good time to go get them. Please watch and track the news so that you'll know the best way to take care of your family. MHP Gardner teased me last week. He said when he watched the Friday question and answer video, he thought he was watching a movie. And I know this has gone on much too long, but I hope some of the information has been helpful, that you have a great weekend, and that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching, and stay the course. Cat's Cradle.